We are delighted that this episode of Starts at the Top is sponsored by Avato CRM Solutions. Avato CRM Solutions designs and delivers award-winning customer service, business process outsourcing, and digital and intelligent automation solutions for some of the world's most respected brands, as well as innovative charity and public sector clients. They partner with clients to help them define their customer experience and transformation strategies by implementing the right technology, people, and processes to improve their customer journey while driving new efficiencies and helping them prepare for the future. To find out more about how Avato CRM Solutions could help an organisation like yours, and to receive a free, no obligation chat, visit avato.co.uk/Wales Air Ambulance.
This is a culture that allows violence to exist. And, it's not just about those incidents of violence, of sexual assault. It's about everything else that is allowing it to happen.
Welcome to a brand new episode of Starts at the Top, our podcast about digital leadership and change. I'm Paul Thomas.
And I'm Zoe Amma. We were delighted and privileged to speak to a very exciting guest today, Soma Sara, author and founder of Everyone's Invited. Paul, what did you think of this conversation?
Well, where do I begin? I think it's probably the most nervous I've been for any conversation that we've had on the podcast.
Why was that? Just out of interest.
Well, I think the content. I think you go behind the scenes a bit. You sent me a message when we were reading the book, saying, "You're okay. How are you finding this?" And I think my response was something along the lines of, "Well, it's not a massive surprise. I think I'm fairly well read. I watch lots of TV and documentaries and films and things like that. And, I've got my eyes pretty much wide open. But still, by the time I got to the book, by the time I got to the end of the book, my eyes were well and truly open. And I think we had a discussion straight after the episode about what happens next. And I found myself evangelizing the book quite a lot over the past couple of weeks. I've given a copy to a client of mine, and I've urged somebody that I work with who's working on a big EDI project at the moment to get a copy of the book. But all of that added up to a bit of nervousness around it, especially as the sort of the obvious male in the room as part of the discussion. I think a lot of this is about male toxicity, toxic masculinity. And I guess there was a part of me that was reading it and feeling not defensive, maybe defensive, I don't know. But it was all adding up to making me quite nervous. But the conversation was fantastic, and Summer was absolutely a breath of fresh air. How did you feel?
Absolutely. I think she really is a breath of fresh air. And I was so happy that we were able to get her on the podcast. For anyone who might be new to her work, you'll certainly have come across Everyone's Invited before. You might remember that it absolutely exploded in the media in summer 2020. It's essentially an anti-rape movement organisation, which began when they provided a forum for survivors focused on schools to share their experiences. And I think that they've gone from strength to strength since. I mean, obviously, Sommer's gone on to be widely venerated, quite rightly, for the work that she's doing. And in the interview itself, she talks about the impact it's had, for example, on how Ofsted now assess schools, which is just a fantastic achievement to have. So I'm really, really delighted that we managed to get some time with her to find out a bit more about the story so far and where Everyone's Invited goes from here, and also why Everyone's Invited as a symptom of a wider culture that leaders really need to be aware of, and what actions they need to take in order to deal with misogyny in the workplace and wider society.
Yeah, and I think that was part of the challenge I felt going into this was, we opened the podcast by saying it's a podcast about digital leadership and change, and there's not much digital in this apart from setting up of a website, and there's some really good stuff on social media and how young people are living their lives through their phones, which has been a focus of mine for a good few months, but it's really, really shone a light on that aspect of things. But yeah, why this podcast and why Soma? And I think we sort of had that conversation at the end, didn't we, about where this sits for leaders now. And I think what I was really shocked about looking at the examples on not the examples on the website, but on the Everyone's Invited website, where they share the testimonies from schools, and they mention all the schools that are included or have been included where testimony has come from. And what's particularly shocking about that list is that it starts with hundreds of infant schools. And you suddenly get to the point where you think, why is this relevant for leaders? Well, within organisations, we asked her about this, but within organisations, businesses, whatever sector, I think leaders have to think that this has happened, or something like this has happened in their workplace, is happening or will happen. And therefore, I think it becomes an essential part of every leader's toolkit, if you like, for how to lead in 2023 and beyond. I think it's that important, hence giving copies to clients and thinking about, how do I do more of that? Can I buy some copies and donate them to our local school? How would that go down in a school that might not be expecting 10 copies of Everyone's Invited, but should probably put it in their library? So it sparked a whole bunch of questions for me, but I think that's why, if anyone's wondering, why are you and Zoe talking about this on your digital leadership podcast? Well, that's exactly why I think it's essential that leaders really do think about this.
Exactly. And we all know from our conversations with each other and the work that we do advising organisations, that we do not live in an equal society. We absolutely live at a time when there is so much more work to do in order to create more inclusive spaces. And that includes workplaces as well. And that's why leaders need to know about this stuff.
Yeah. And I think the book will be more than food for thought for any leader that's got questions about this. So I would urge, we will include links to the book and where to buy it online, but I would urge anyone I'm working with is going to hear about it, but I would urge any other leaders that listen to this conversation and have that interest to go and pick up a copy of the book and really absorb it.
And we'd love to hear what our listeners think of this episode. We know there is a lot of quite heavy stuff to think through from this interview, some stuff that really needs to be heard though. And we encourage you to get in touch with us and let us know what you think of our conversation with Soma, and of course the book as well. So now for our conversation with Soma. If we haven't been clear up to this point, please be aware that although there are no specific examples shared, the following conversation includes mentions of sexual assault and rape and may be triggering. So please do proceed with caution. We'll be including a link to some resources that could help you at the end of this interview and also in the show notes as well. In June 2020, Soma Sara founded Everyone's Invited, an anti-rape movement organisation which allows survivors of rape culture to share their stories through testimonies anonymously on their website and Instagram profile. Soma has been included in British Vogue's Vogue 25, won the 2021 Harper's Bazaar Activist of the Year Award, and was included in the BBC 100 Global List of Inspiring and Influential Women of 2021. She has also written for The Times, The Telegraph, The iPaper, Tortoise Media, and The Daily Express. Soma, welcome to Starts at the Top. We are so thrilled to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited and I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's our absolute pleasure. We can't wait to hear more about the book as we go through the conversation today. So, can we begin at the beginning? So, obviously, you've been through this really phenomenal several years since Everyone's Invited was started. So, can you take us back to the beginning, to that moment when you decided to set up Everyone's Invited?
Yes, so it was back in June 2020, and I was finishing up university and completing my English degree at UCL. And it was during lockdown, actually, and I was finishing my finals, and it was all online. And I'd been having a lot of discussions and conversations with close friends, and we just began to realize how many of us had experienced sexual violence and harassment and abuse and misogyny and sexism in our teenage years, and how this was such a formative and important time. I think, in any young person's life, you're growing, you're learning, you're developing, and I think those experiences were they were very debilitating. And I think there was a lot of shame and a lot of stigma. And it was really hard to articulate them and speak out, or even kind of recognize them as for what they were at the time. Because it was so normalized and it was happening so often. And I think it was kind of, we had to have that time, and getting to uni and kind of reflection and looking back and realizing, wow, this is actually not okay. This is not normal. This is not okay. And how, questioning why that was normal. And yeah, so I think it came with like age and maturity, and I guess having a moment to really pause, which was kind of in lockdown as well. And yeah, so it was that realization, and then I guess maybe anger and frustration, and feeling feeling like it was really challenging and traumatic to go through, and having a sense of just wanting to talk about it. And that's what I did. I shared my story on Instagram, and I shared some of my experiences, and I spoke to this kind of idea of a culture, a rape culture, where thoughts, attitudes, and beliefs in society have the effect of normalizing and trivializing sexual violence. So I know rape culture as a term might sound a little bit scary or intimidating or extreme to some people, because obviously the word rape is invoking violence, and it's taboo, and it's really stigmatized. But what it's actually saying is, this is a culture that allows violence to exist, and it's not just about those incidents of violence, of sexual assault. It's about everything else that is allowing it to happen. So it's the behaviors, the attitudes, the way we treat each other, the objectification, the media, the language that we use, what we're listening to, what we're watching, what we're consuming, the way that women and girls are portrayed in film and in the media, the way that, girls are treated and spoken about. And then that's also bleeding into the behaviors and how we're treating each other, and dehumanization, and then, sexual harassment and stalking and it goes on and on. So it's kind of this incremental culture where everything is connected, and there are these gateway behaviors. And then it's also the victim blaming and the lack of volition to believe survivors when they speak out, and the invalidation of their stories. And it's the enabling and people doing nothing that creates this, this culture that allows rape to happen. And unfortunately, this is not rare. It happens all the time. It's 1 in 3. And, the statistics and the facts of, I guess, the reality of the situation is staggering once you confront it. So I think it's quite challenging for people to really, sorry, I'm going on such a tangent, but yeah, so I guess I've really segued from the original question. But I shared this story, and a lot of people resonated with it, a lot of my communities and my peers, and they started sharing theirs with me.
everything you said really resonates with me, Soma. And I think what was really brutal and very necessary about your book, and also the amazing work that you've done, is just as you were talking there and from your book too, made me really think about how those first years when you are starting to go out into the world as a teenager are a really formative time, aren't they? And then if violence becomes really normalized and embedded in those first experiences of relationships, that's kind of horrifying, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think it just kind of contributes to a cycle, cycles of violence, and that kind of, I guess, standard being accepted as the normal. And, it becomes, difficult to challenge because you don't have an understanding of something that's healthy or, a loving and equal and healthy dynamic within relationships. Yeah, I think it perpetuates those cycles of abuse. And I also think experiencing those kind of things so young, it's an incredibly vulnerable and formative time. Your kind of brain is developing, your body, you're changing, you're growing, and you're so young. And, the research shows that trauma stays with you, and it can really impact the trajectory of your life, especially childhood trauma. It can kind of transform your brain chemistry, and you can develop really severe mental health disorders, and anxiety and depression and PTSD, and this really impacts your life. And it's not something that just goes away. It's something that you kind of have to learn to live with, and that's, I guess, what I was really trying to convey in the book is. And also, obviously, with platforming these stories, it's all about flipping the script and platforming the survivor perspective, and platforming that these things that happen really can destroy people's lives and really have an impact on them for years to come, whether it's, being unable to, finish school, pass your GCSEs, flunking out of university, falling into addiction, falling into crime, falling into, really bad, abusive, toxic relationships. And it's basically, it can lead to, suicide and early death. So it's really this kind of ripple effect that can, it's so, I think the impact is so, it's vast, and I think it's really important to emphasize that.
You're bringing this really important conversation out into the open, aren't you? And that's what I think is so liberating and so sort of necessary about it, because some of the types of conversations that you talk about on Everyone's Invited, and also through the book as well, previously, before the incredible work that you've done, I feel like a lot of those conversations happen behind closed doors between women talking to each other and saying, oh, this thing happened to me and it didn't feel right, and that felt wrong, and was it my fault, and all those things that we all go through. And that's what I think is so wonderful about the work you've done, that you're taking all of this awful stories that have happened and shining this light on it and saying, look, this isn't right, this needs to change. So you launch Everyone's Invited, and obviously that was huge. I remember that blowing up. It was all over the Daily Mail, every single newspaper, it was all over social media. What was it like to be at the centre of that? Because obviously I hadn't met you at the time, but it looked like a massive media storm.
Yeah, I mean, it was totally surreal and unexpected. And I mean, I could never have imagined that it would have reached that point so quickly and exploded in that way, and I guess unleashed this tidal wave of stories of people sharing, of people speaking out and talking about these incredibly vulnerable and really traumatic, in many cases, the worst moment of people's lives in some cases. And I think it was a very intense time, very emotional time. But I think it was almost like I felt like this is like, we have been given this microphone. We've been given this microphone. Myself and my team, my organization, at the time it was just kind of a group of activists and a group of friends, but we've really felt, we've got to make the most of it. We've got to make the most of this opportunity and do our best to platform these stories and showcase, these experiences and shine a light and expose rape culture. And to do this with empathy, compassion, and understanding. And so I think at the moment it was almost like I don't have any other choice but to, I felt something inside you just kind of comes and you're like, this is like, you just have to do it. And I think it was very stressful and it felt like a lot of pressure and a huge responsibility. But there was a huge amount of support and incredible people just in my own life supporting me, my team, my family, my friends, but just publicly, widely, the journalists, the media, the public was so engaged. And I think, we were kind of in this momentum and being lifted and pushed forward. And I think it just goes to show how important this issue is and how everyone is affected by it. It caused a storm because it is so relatable. I mean, and especially for my generation, I think it really hit home with, young people in education, but then obviously their parents as well, who are, an older generation who have children. And, I guess in the early days, the conversation was very focused around schools and universities. So it was engaging across, cross generations and also not just about, parents worrying about their children. It was issues, that affect everyone of all ages. And I think every woman kind of has a story or has something that's they've experienced in life that probably has left them changed and slightly traumatized in some way, that is kind of related to misogyny, rape culture, sexism, sexual violence. And I mean, it's a really sad, devastating reality when you begin to confront the scale and the universal prevalence of sexual violence in society and in the world.
I so agree with that. Absolutely. I think everyone does have a story like that. And having finished your incredible book a few days ago, one of the most shocking things about it to me was that it wasn't shocking in the sense that, as you say, this sense of violence, this experience of violence is so prevalent, isn't it?
Yeah, and I mean, that makes me think about, something that yesterday I was in a school, and our organization delivers education now. And one of the kind of moments in one of the presentations we do, probably in most of our presentations actually, is we talk about the Ofsted report that was triggered after Everyone's Invited exploded. They had a national review in schools. And one of the findings is that 9 out of 10 girls experience unsolicited dick pics and cyber flashing, and 9 out of 10 girls are victims of sexist and misogynistic name calling, and that sexual abuse online and sexual harassment had become totally normalized in schools, and that they were universal experiences in schools. And we show this every time to the students, and every single time we ask, is anyone surprised by these statistics? And no one puts their hand up. Ever. And that happens every time we go into schools. Wow. And it just shows this is so normal. It is just every day. And the saddest thing is it's accepted. And I think that is what was really inspiring and hopeful when, Everyone's Invited began picking up, is that it was that sense of we're not going to let this slide anymore. This is not okay. And it was incredible to have that kind of moment of, solidarity and refusal to accept that as normal.
Absolutely. I loved seeing some of those photos of students going along to their schools and protesting and holding up these banners saying we won't be treated like this. And there's questions then about the complicity of the school in covering things up in some cases. I thought that was fantastic. You've put power in the hands of these young people.
We only hope that, we were so moved during that period when we were seeing that response. It was just incredible to see how many young people kind of took it on, I don't know, like took action in their own right and really challenged what was happening within their institutions. And it was so inspiring to see 16, 15, 18-year-old girls having a voice and speaking out. And it was just, amazing. And they were so brave. And it was really surreal. But
we discussed just before this that I listened to the audio version of the book, and I remember walking along listening to the final chapter, which is called Backlash, which I think you talk about how the importance of backlash. And yes, it's hard to be in that, but you need it, because then you know that you are generating a discussion and a conversation that needs to happen. And there's a point towards the end of the book where I don't know if I was reading this, if I'd been reading this, it would have come across in the same way, but you sort of say, and another thing, and another thing, and another thing, and it layers and layers and layers. And my sort of sense was, my God, how do they keep going in front of all of this stuff? And it must be exactly that. It's the reaction of the girls in the schools who are bringing in the placards and the banners and standing up and fighting for it that makes this completely valid and completely worth continuing with, despite the sort of the barrage of backlash and abuse that you must receive day to day.
Yeah, definitely. I think it honestly meant so much at the time, and it still does now when people share that it had a positive impact on their life and that it changed things, because it was a really tough time and it was very intense, and it makes it all feel so worth it. And even yesterday, after finishing the talk, we have 4 teenage boys come up to us saying, "Thank you so much. We really enjoyed that. That was really interesting. I've never thought about things that way. Thank you. You've really made me rethink some of my own experiences and behavior." And that's it's amazing. And you just feel wow, this is so worth it. This is really, it's very rewarding when you get to have those moments. And there were so many moments like that when everything exploded. There were so many messages, so many people sharing, so many people coming up to you. And it's overwhelming, but it was just it was a lot to take in, but you just remember, you remember the essence, you remember why you're doing this. And it feels like something that is worthwhile and important. And I think it's easy to forget that when things are getting really challenging and a little bit, pretty scary at points. You're
creating a movement.
Well, now I hope, things are kind of slowing down in terms of all the media and stuff, but it's really amazing to see, off the back of the movement, having, given the opportunity to write the book, and now really growing the organization as a charity has been a way to kind of, I guess, extend and preserve that work and continue doing the work in a more structured way. So I hope that will become the legacy of that moment.
And we've talked about the book. So for anyone who doesn't know about the book, can you tell them a bit more about why you wrote it?
Yeah, so it is, I wrote it, I guess, because of everything that happened with Everyone's Invited and the kind of media explosion and the big, and, the testimonies being shared. And I think I just really wanted to grapple with the experience of what happened, and also this culture, this rape culture, I really wanted to interrogate it. I really wanted to understand it. I wanted to break it down, and I wanted to try and, see if I could find some solutions, find some hope. And I also really wanted to write something that was accessible and universal, and that, anyone could pick up and, understand these ideas. And so yeah, it's essentially a collection of essays, and lots of different things are covered. We're talking about pornography and the impact of the mainstreaming of hardcore pornography on young people and young people's understanding of sex and relationships. Talking also about gender scripts, masculinity and femininity, stereotypes, how that really impacts gender norms and how we treat each other. And there's lots on intersectionality and kind of experiences of sexual violence and sexism that are layered by different, things like racism, and understanding how people have unique experiences of rape culture depending on their identities and who they are. And then I talk about the backlash as well. I have a long chapter breaking it all down and really focusing on that. And yeah, there's a lot about digital sexual violence and image-based sexual abuse and harassment. So thinking about the digital world and the digital landscape, and thinking about how trying to bridge those generational gaps and help an older generation understand what it's like to come of age in this time, in this era. And, so we can hopefully educate them in properly and meaningfully supporting their children and young people, because it's a very different way of growing up. I haven't read it in a while, but I hope that was an okay summary.
I was going to ask you about that, because one of the things that I sort of took away from it, so I've got 2 boys, and my immediate thought was, I've got a 14-year-old boy who I want to read the book, but I know him and he won't. So I need to find a way of getting that content to him, sitting down and talking to him, thinking it through. But you really do make the point, and I think it's well made, about asking parents to step up to the plate. And obviously, there are other influences in their lives at that age, not just us, but the role of parenting is really, really quite clear to me. And you're talking to 2 people in me and Zoe who are probably fairly well placed, he says, to really try and get to the bottom of what that experience of growing up in this online, offline world. I mean, we experience it still probably as 2 things. There's an offline world and there's an online world, and we can see where they blend. But for a young person today, those 2 things are so interconnected that even Zoe and I would struggle to be able to relate to our kids in the same way that they are experiencing this. So I don't know what the question is here, but there is a point that if we are in a privileged position to be able to understand that and to be able to navigate that, how do we and how does this content get to those parents who don't have that same thought process? And I equate it to simple things. Like I'm a gamer, and I've always played video games. And when I hear that like a 14-year-old child is being given Call of Duty, which is an 18-rated game, for example, it's usually because the parents haven't invested the time to understand what it is they are actually putting in the hands of their children. And that's the gap for me, I think, is how do we bridge that gap between, how do we get that the sort of the ideas and the content in front of those parents and well, all of us, but those parents in particular.
I think it's always going to be challenging, but I mean, even just doing this podcast today, just talking about it as much as possible, bringing it up, having these discussions is a way to kind of start to engage people. And I think we have to be careful and thoughtful about the language and the tone and the way that we're kind of approaching these things. And I think, to some, it is it's a controversial issue, and some people react quite strongly in a negative way. And I think we have to be mindful of that. And I think we're living in such polarized, kind of really kind of chaotic reactionary times where there often isn't space for dialogue anymore in many issues, and there's a lot of emotion, a lot of anger. People are easily triggered, and I think sometimes we're unable to kind of think rationally, think logically, because we're so emotional. And I think it's about, I don't know, trying, being aware of that, being conscious of that, making space for that, and trying to approach these conversations in a non kind of combative, aggressive way, without shame, questioning, asking, making sure everyone has an opportunity to kind of say what they think, and that you're actually listening to them and giving them that moment to speak. Because I think everyone, just at the end of the day, everyone wants to be seen, and they want to be heard, and they want to be respected, and we have to just come to these really challenging conversations from a compassionate and an empathetic place. And yeah, I mean, it's definitely easier said than done. It's really hard. I'm really interested in doing more research and learning more about kind of non-violent communication, and also the idea of, I've recently heard about compassionate activism. So thinking about things like, how can we, and I touch on this in the book, how do we build these bridges and reunite and kind of have these conversations? Like, it's so sad to me that we're living in a time where we literally would rather not have them than engage or even interact with people who disagree with us on many issues. And I'm just like, how did we get here? It feels even less, it feels like incredibly intolerant and reductive and one-dimensional and very harmful and toxic in many cases. And I really hope we can build on listening and sharing and actually having constructive dialogues that are getting somewhere. And but it's much easier said than done. And a lot of people who do activism, who do activist work, who are championing causes that they're coming from a place of trauma and harm and pain. And a lot of it's really, if you're being challenged and attacked, of course, as like a traumatized individual, I think very human response is to shout and attack back and be really easily triggered. I think, sadly, a lot of the people doing, engaged in activism in the Vogue sector, violence against women and girls, in survivor sector, have not, they're still traumatized and they haven't done their healing. And sometimes, and in many cases, traumatized people can actually be, quite harmful and can perpetuate harm. So that's why healing is so essential to everyone involved. But it's really hard. It's really hard to navigate and to deal with.
So what can leaders do about this in the workplace? Because we've talked about how this culture is so pervasive, isn't it? So in the workplace, what would you like leaders to do in order to really combat this kind of culture?
I think we have to, there are a lot of things that can happen, but, basic is just actually making space for survivors or people with these experiences, or people who have experienced harm in the workplace, toxic behavior, hurt, pain, giving them spaces and an opportunity to vocalize and articulate what's going on, and to take concerns and issues seriously and really respect that space. I think it's just so important to kind of, you've got to set, I guess, within any organization, it has to be a kind of whole organization culture, which comes from the top and needs to go to the very bottom. And I guess it's about setting values, setting the tone, and really paying attention to that and prioritizing that, and, making sure that you have people who are in positions of power who embody, positive values of empathy and compassion and understanding and respect, and, and also I think giving everyone a voice and an opportunity to vocalize how they're feeling about, any of these situations is really important as well. And yeah, education obviously is so important. I mean, there are so many specialist organizations out there, including Everyone's Invited, that deliver education around these issues, cultures of sexual violence, misogyny, sexism. And it's really crucial that, everyone is getting a basic understanding of how this can occur, whether it's kind of breaking down and understanding and tackling rape myths in society, prejudice, gender stereotypes. It's so important. And reading stories, survivor stories, again, empathy building, trying to, endeavoring to understand people's experiences that might kind of differ or jar to your own kind of perception of reality, and understanding that your reality isn't the only reality, that life is so nuanced and complex, and we're all coming from different places and backgrounds and experiences, and we're different, and that's okay. And yeah, so I think that was very much a kind of a long tangent, but hopefully that helps a little bit.
It does help. And are you starting to see demand from organisations and businesses?
Yeah, so we've started
for these
doing
resources
work
as well as schools.
Yeah, so I think we're seeing more of that now, and it's just still in early days, but we've started doing some work in organisations and charities, and yeah, so that's been really exciting. And it's so important because, as we said from the very start, which I really try and drive home in the book, is that this is a universal problem. I mean, it's happening in schools, but it's not just happening in schools. It's just one section of society. It's everywhere. If 56 MPs are being accused of sexual misconduct, and that's a standard that's being set at the very, very top, then, please do not be surprised, if this is happening in every corner, whether it's in policing, in the criminal justice system, in the education sector. It's widespread. It's a universal culture.
Yeah. I think that's such a great point, powerfully made, Soma. And is there something here, a kind of a barrier almost, that you see leaders, head teachers, whatever form they may take, to go through in order to just acknowledging the fact that this stuff does happen, and there is a chance that it could happen on your watch, and you need to confront the fact that this is happening in some form in so many places, and you have to accept that and do what you can to safeguard against it happening.
I think that is such a important point, that that it is that kind of confrontation and acceptance of that this is like real and happening and happens. And I think that it's actually hard for a lot of people. And I think that, can often be the barrier, people being unwilling to accept their own kind of part in enabling this culture to exist. And I think that's why many people are so disturbed by the term rape culture, because they view rape as this really, obviously it's horrific and painful, but their idea of rape is something that is, very one-dimensional and can only happen in a dark alleyway by a stranger in the middle of the night and by a monster. And actually that kind of envisioning of rape, that rape script is serving to compartmentalize and separate yourself from the reality of, we are all actually complicit and part of this culture together. And that, if we don't challenge this in our daily lives, whether it's through challenging misogyny, challenging sexism, challenging misogynistic language, we are contributing to a rape culture that allows the worst kinds of sexual violence and assault and rape to continue to exist and thrive, that we're all a part of it, and we're all responsible. We're all in it. We're all responsible for this culture. We've been socialized in patriarchy, in, a system, and we need to understand that it's subconscious, it's internalized. We have a lot of internalized misogyny. We need to unravel that, unpick that, and do all that we can to challenge this in our day-to-day lives. I think it is really hard for people to come to terms with that, and to accept that reality that they are part of this, they're responsible, but we all are. And it's definitely challenging.
I think you almost have to go that step further as a leader, don't you? And just make the assumption, like you said, you stood in a room full of school children and you've asked whether this is surprising to anyone, and nobody puts their hands up. So as a leader, perhaps you almost need to take that step further and say, look, I just assume that it's happening and therefore this is what we are doing. To recognise that before you, God forbid, before you get the report from somebody that says that this has happened. So, my immediate reaction was to go out and buy 10 copies of the book and sort of distribute them to organisations that I work with, not in a judgmental way, but just in a sort of read this and absorb it, and then let's have a conversation about how you see this being approached in your organisation. Because it really is that obvious to me, I guess, that's a step that you should take as a leader. Have read the book.
I don't think it's scaremongering. I think the way you frame it in the book, was really sensible, because I was talking about this subject to someone else and I was saying, well, if you're going to an event, it's just a standard thing that you would have a fire safety briefing and that people would say, well, the fire exits are over there. We accept that bad things can happen in that context. Why can't we accept that if you are running a huge event with hundreds of people coming, the chances are that something like this may happen, and therefore you need to think ahead and plan ahead for how you can prevent that happening, and also protect the survivors when things like that do happen as well. So it seems to me that it's a very sensible thing to think through.
Yeah, and I mean, it is. I think if you look at the statistics and the reality and the reports and the endless research that's been done for the past decades, it's really not an unreasonable thing to really prioritize this area and, accept the reality of this and take action to address this, as you say, in that kind of context. And I mean, it's really interesting that you use that example of fire exits, because I think that's just shows, it's culture that's culturally accepted as a norm. And I think culture change is possible. We made it normal to put our seatbelt on every time we get into a car, or now we don't smoke in public spaces. And it's it's possible. It just takes time and effort, and, backlash is inevitable and it's difficult, I think. But I truly think that, it's doable to make this, and it's already happening. I mean, in schools, for the first thing, I think it's generally now, and I think the Ofsted review really emboldened this and it really gave what we were saying credibility, and it basically confirmed kind of our work. But it's told, all schools across the country, across the UK, that they have to address this and take this seriously. And if they don't, they're not going to pass it off their review. So I think, it's that's made a huge difference. And we're seeing that across all the schools that we go into in our education programs now. This is really prioritized and really taken seriously, and it's really high up on the agenda, and it has to be now. And hopefully we can see that moving, further into different sectors and different organizations, different parts of societies, in business. And it's really amazing to see this change happening. And I think it's not just, everyone's invited. It's, this whole area being looked at in art and film and culture and music. And I think more and more victims and survivors are having the confidence and the courage and the freedom to speak out and articulate what they've been through and achieve a sense of catharsis and an avenue for healing. And there is community and solidarity in sharing your story. And I think that's what the testimonies and people who've been part of our community have shown us, that, I think, that you're not alone, and you should never be ashamed of what you've been through, and that there's always there's hope for the future, and change is possible.
It's incredibly validating to share those stories, isn't it? And to have people listen. And I think that's one of the wonderful things that you've provided with Everyone's Invited, because then it has that ripple effect of encouraging more conversations, doesn't it? And there were some things that I shared with Paul and some other people last year, and I found that so helpful just to see the way that people react, especially how men reacted to it and how shocked they were. And that in itself really helped me process the experience. It did help with some of the really horrible after effects from what had happened. So you're creating this kind of chain effect of change somewhere, which is wonderful.
That's something that so many, countless people who we've spoken to, they also feel that and express that, being able to articulate their experience has really been so essential to their ability to process what they've been through, and then, get to a place where they can, begin that healing journey. And obviously it can be challenging, it can be triggering, it can be really hard, but it's like the beginning of, getting to a place where they can feel happy and safe and alive and joyous once more. So I'm very grateful, and I feel like it's been a really incredible privilege to have been part of, to have been doing work that is making, change like that in people's lives. And I'm so proud of my whole team and everyone at Everyone's Invited who was involved. It was really kind of like a village, probably a town of people working behind the scenes. And I think, it's just been amazing to be a part of that.
And obviously Everyone's Invited is now registered as a charity. So congratulations, it's super exciting. What are your plans for it?
Thank you so much. I guess now we are very much focused on prevention and preserving the safe space, healing. But our area, I think, is more around prevention and exploring solutions, conducting research, partnering with academics, looking at our testimonies, and just basically doing everything that we can to continue this work, continue giving survivors a voice and a space to share, and also, intervening early and helping create change amongst young people within, in young minds and education, and and just continuing that work and keeping up that momentum and really focusing on the eradication and focusing on the solutions. It's a really probably a long-term job, and quite, our mission statement is to expose and eradicate rape culture with empathy, compassion, and understanding. And I think that's quite an ambitious mission statement. And I think it could take decades. It could take hundreds of years. But I'm so inspired by my team and by the incredible people that we get to engage with, and especially the young people. Young people in schools are just the most passionate and interested and engaged and really inspiring. And I think we learn the most from them.
That's wonderful. Well, congratulations, Soma, on the book and Everyone's Invited becoming a charity, and also all the fantastic work you've done. Where can people go to find out more about the book and also the charity?
So the book can be bought in bookstores, Waterstones, Amazon, Simon & Schuster website, and the paperback is out next week, which is very exciting. And the website, everyone'sinvited.uk, Instagram, Everyone's Invited, Twitter is EI Movement, and just Googling Everyone's Invited, and I guess all of our links will come up. And please log on, join our community, read the stories, share your story if you feel comfortable. We have some incredible resources on our Instagram and a lot of support, and a really comprehensive support page on our website as well that really details a list of really amazing organizations out there providing direct support to survivors who need it. And there's lots there for everyone: male survivors, female survivors, LGBTQ survivors, survivors of color, and guides more about, specific for parents, young people. So there's really a huge mix and diverse mix there. So please do check it out if you need support.
There's tons of great resources there, so we'll make sure that we link to the site in the show notes. Soma, thank you so much. It's been super inspiring to talk to you. We are so in awe of everything you've done, and we are so excited about everything you're going to go on and do as well. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been really a pleasure to be here, and I really appreciate all your questions, and I really enjoyed it. So thank you. And thank you for spreading the word and for platforming my book and having me on. I really appreciate that.
You're so welcome. And I was just going to suggest that people buy the book in bulk as well and distribute it to their friends. And that would seem like a good thing to do.
And in the workplace as well, Paul. I think you're onto something with getting multiple copies and sharing them around the workplace. I think that's a great idea. If you've got a workplace book club, as quite a few workplaces do, why not put this book on the list?
Yeah. And I was suggesting to the person I sent it to, actually, that within lots of organisations now have EDI networks. Does the EDI network have recommended reading list, a library, something like that? It should be added, definitely. And I'm going to petition to get it added into the school as well. The kids.
Thank you so much.
Kids are going to go to the same school, so I'm going to send them a note saying that it ought to be in the library.
Amazing, thank you.
It's a great idea, Paul. Let us know how you get on with that. Thank you so much to Soma for her time, her openness, and that incredible discussion about what leaders need to do about misogyny in the workplace and wider society. If you have been affected by anything that you've heard, there are links and resources on the Everyone's Invited website that will direct you to help, including the Report Abuse in Education helpline. And the page that you're looking for is everyone'sinvited.uk/help/find help. And we'll include that link in the show notes.
So we'll be back in a couple of weeks with a brand new episode. And in the meantime, you can find us on Twitter. We're at Starts at the Top 1. And you can also email us at startsthetop@gmail.com.
And if you listen to us on Apple Podcasts or anywhere else that you get your podcasts, you can rate and review. Please do. All your reviews help us to reach more listeners. And we'll speak to you again in a couple of weeks. See you then.
Thank you very much. Bye.